Cigar-shaped UFOs, that is something that has been mentioned a lot in the UFO cases and UFO sightings. And this is one of those stories. And I bet you haven't heard about it. I mean, who knows much about Scandinavian UFOs? So here I am. I'm here to spill the tea. Hello, my friends. I missed you so much. I hope you can tell the same about me. Really? Oh my God, that's so cute. I just want to take a couple of seconds to tell I do appreciate each and every of my subscribers. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do that because we have here a very interesting, really small community with curious people. And that being said, let's jump into our case because there's a lot to cover. And this case is gonna move us to Sweden during the 80s. It was November the 6th, year 1988. A small Swedish community called Vitsjo, I hope I pronounced it correctly, and the story basically at the beginning, as you're gonna see, will revolve around this married couple, Susanne and Mikael Olofsson, and this couple was witnesses to something really strange that can be described as UFOs. So let's move to that Sunday of November the 6th, 1988. So Mikael and Susanne were both visiting Mikael's parents' house together with their both children. One was Johanna, she was 3 years old, and the other was just a small baby, 3 months old, and her name was Lina. So at one time, all of the family gathers around the TV. So they gonna watch the TV show called Aktuellt. I believe that's something like similar to evening news. So Susanne sits nearby the window and she holds her 3-month-old Lina and she's nursing her. So now and then she just peeks out the window, you know, like we all usually do when we sit by the window. And then suddenly her eye is caught to some kind of light outside. After looking for a few seconds on that light, she thought, wow, that plane really flies so low. So she shouted out to the rest of the family who were there present by the TV and said, look at the plane, it flies so low. So Mikael, her husband, and his father, his name was Gunnar, both of them joined Susanne by the window to see this weird plane flying so low. Susanne recalled it was a large, oval, brightly shining object that came gliding over the treetops. While Susanne stayed inside with Gunnar, Mikael decided to go out in the yard to inspect this thing better. And what he saw was a shining object that shined like magnesium. I googled it and literally it would be like whitish silvery color. Mikael also stressed that this object that was flying over did not make a slightest sound. At this point, Susanne, who was watching from the inside, felt like this is not for good. Something bad is about to happen. So she decided to join her husband outside in the yard. But at the moment when she went out, the object simply disappeared without a trace. Susanne and Mikael went back to the house to join Gunnar, and all of them were so puzzled and really confused about the event that they just witnessed. After a while, which was around like 9:15 or 9:30 p.m., Susanne and Mikael, together with their daughters, decided to return back to their own home. They put both daughters in the car, but apparently the little daughter, the 3-month-old, couldn't fall asleep and was still active and like needy, if I can say like that. So they decided that they're not gonna go straight home, but they're gonna do a little retour to ride a little bit with the car, because for them, for the little girls, the car engine sound kind of helped them to fall asleep. I've heard a lot that it helps for many children to fall asleep, so they decided to ride around a little bit. They ended up driving towards the direction where they previously saw this shiny object flying. And at one point when Mikael, who was driving, had to make a turn, he was simply blinded by some kind of light. So this bright light appeared and then disappeared. What they thought was that maybe there was a car approaching towards them and then it made a turn and this is when the light disappeared. But when they went a little bit further, they understood that there is no turn and also there was no sign of another car. Suzanne, who was sitting at the back seat with both of the daughters, was looking out of the window and up to the sky, and she noticed something really weird. It looked like a tornado or possibly a mushroom. We turned into the road where we could see how the mushroom flew around as if cruising around. After a while it disappeared and we continued to Vitsio. They reached Vitsio at around 11 p.m. but they decided to make another circle around with the car since the girls were not quite asleep, but they needed a little bit extra to completely fall asleep. So they turned back and went back again to that area. And so the couple goes back again to that weird area where they had this weird encounter with the lights, and it was actually nearby the local golf club. I must say that this couple has guts, because even I, being a curious person, would not go back, I guess, in this case. Then I saw a light from the right side of the clubhouse that I thought came from a truck, said Mikael. But the lightning wasn't right. There were simply too many lights, so we drove slowly forward to see what it was. My first thought was that there was a burglary in a cabin. But to see exactly what it was that radiated so much light, they had to kind of find another place because the golf club house was kind of blocking the view. So then they remembered that nearby there's a slope that was usually used by locals to do sledging during the winter. So they went back there and they got kind of their answer, and it was not exactly what they expected to see there. There hung a huge object over the golf club. It was illuminating literally the whole area of the golf club. And the couple afterwards estimated that it could have been around 75 up to 100 meters long. And it was just like hovering over a couple of meters over the ground. The object was lens-shaped with severed ends and no more than 2 to 3 meters thick, and equipped with a row of lights that shone in red, yellow, and green. Some of the lights were like burning magnesium, the same color I had seen on the object over my in-laws' house earlier in the evening, recalled Suzanne. Suzanne recalled that the light was kind of shining towards one direction, kind of like into the nearby woods, but not shining towards them where they were sitting in the car. She also adds, it lit up a lot. It felt like a large number of people were standing and shining lots of lights, and it pulsated all the time. It was clear and distinct, quite close to us, but we saw no windows, no creatures, and heard no sounds. Since the couple had their kids in the car, they thought it would not be wise to go out and explore this phenomena closer, so they decided to go further. And I do understand them. I mean, I wouldn't even go back as they did. They did quite a lot considering that they had those kids in the car. So, to mention, they weren't like staying there with the car, they were slowly moving and looking at this object. Suzanne estimated afterwards that they might have looked at it for around like 30 seconds in total. Then she said that she felt so scared, so shocked that she said to Michael, "Please, let's get the hell out of here." Mikael, of course, listened to Suzanne. He accelerated the car and just went away. But while they did that, they still saw that this object started to rise up. And as Suzanne described it, that object looked so huge, yet also it looked light as feather. So basically the car drove away, but Suzanne, who was, remember, she was sitting at the back seat, she turned around just to look outside the back window, and she saw that the object was rising up and up to a moment when everything went dark and the object simply disappeared. And after this disappearance, again, Suzanne saw this mushroom shape in the sky. Mikael and Suzanne were so scared and shocked that they decided that this needs to be reported to the police. And since Mikael's parents' house at this point was closer than their own home, they decided to return back to Mikael's parents' home again to make the call to the police. And this, my friends, is where the story goes bananas. So they came to the parents' house, they went out of the car, and Suzanne recalls that she felt like this unusual warmth around her. Maybe that was just stress, but I don't know, like when she was giving the testimony, she felt like that's important to add. So they started to ring the doorbell many times, nobody answered. Then they started to bang by the door, nobody answered, but we all know that the parents are there. They were literally visiting a couple of hours ago, but nobody answered. And what is more, Mikael's mother had a really, really light sleep, so whenever there was a slight noise, she was always woken up by that. But yet nobody answered the door. But they didn't give up. So they went to the closest phone booth and decided to call to the parents' house. And surprise, surprise, they pick up the phone. And when they said, "Why didn't you open the door? We were knocking, we were ringing, we were calling for you." And they said, "We didn't hear anything. Nothing happened. So we are here. Come, we're gonna open the door." Needless to say that they were confused. Not only them, but also the parents. But then they opened the door, they come to their house, they tried to call the police, but the phone didn't work. What the fuck? Like, couple of minutes ago, it worked when they were calling from the phone booth. What is happening there? And then they decided to switch on the TV, and it also didn't work. Later, they learned that the closest neighbor, which was like a couple of kilometers away, also encountered some problems with electronic devices. The phone wasn't working, the TV wasn't working, the radio wasn't working. So suspicious, right? I must say that this family is really brave, because you know what they did? Yeah, they decided to return. So they left both of the daughters with the granny. Her name was Ingrid. And Gunnar, together with Mikael and Suzanne, went back to the car and went back to the golf club. And they also took a camera with them in case there is something that they could film. Side note, can we just take a second to appreciate Granny Ingrid? Because she was left there home alone with 2 little kids to protect. And what if the shit that was in the sky comes back? I mean, she's so brave. The 3 brave hearts in their car are again moving towards the golf club. When they get there, there's nothing to see. Everything's silent, as if nothing had happened before. So they go a little bit further away from the golf club, and then Mikael notices this mushroom-shaped thing in the sky again, which means that this object must be quite close. And then he shows to his father Gunnar, the grandpa, "See, there's this mushroom-shaped thing in the sky." And what happens next is quite controversial, because Gunnar starts to freak out. He gets paranoid, panic, and starts to scream at his son, "Let's just get out of here ASAP." Mikael recalls that he tried to explain to his father that maybe they should stick around and take out the camera and film at least something, because they came there. But his father, he was so paranoid. He grabbed Mikael's hand and said, "No, we are going home right now." And so nothing was filmed. The camera just simply laid there in Gunnar's lap all the time and was not even picked up. And this leaves us with many questions and even questioning the credibility of the story at all. But we will get to that, and there is credibility. Believe me. Stay tuned. Shortly after midnight, the couple, together with the kids, returned back to their own home. They were puzzled, confused. They had so many questions about what they just experienced. What was this adventure about? And they decided to call the police. They called the police of Hässleholm, but they didn't show any enthusiasm about it. And this case was just like discarded. They didn't even investigate it. And later on, it was picked up by UFO Sweden. And UFO Sweden is basically like an organization that looks into different UFO or paranormal reports just to make sure if there's evidence that proves that this is extraterrestrial or this can be explained with something logical. The next morning comes and Mikael meets again his father Gunnar, and they both decide to go back to the golf club to explore the area. Maybe there are some traces or some evidence about the last night's events. And no surprise, there's nothing. They should have filmed something. I'm so angry about that. Now, before you say that anyone can invent a story like that and tell this, oh, we had an encounter or we saw something in the sky, hold on. Because apart from a couple of things that seem quite weird, like this filming that didn't happen, Olofsson family were not the only ones who saw something in the sky on that evening. A couple of kilometers away from the Olofssons that night at around 8 p.m. in a place called Oljalt, a woman called Pia Johansson and her husband were sitting in their home by TV. Both of their kids were already asleep, though they were in a chill mood. And she recalls, we were sitting in front of the TV and one sofa is right by the large window. I was lying down on the sofa when I saw something floating right over the roof. So I rushed up to see it through another window and then saw something huge, very, very close to the roof. At first, I couldn't figure out what it resembled, but later I compared it to Zeppelin. Cigar-shaped with some green and red lights around it. The body itself was just a gray mass as I saw it. According to Pia, this object went over their house and it was sailing towards the direction where Olofssons lived. She recalled that she didn't hear any sound of it, and after like 30 seconds, it was already gone. Couple of 100 meters away from across the road, two men, their names were Jan Sjöstrand and Erik Bengtsson, went out for a car ride. They had just repaired their car's brakes and they wanted to test it. So they were driving really slow, like 50 kilometers per hour, and they were moving south from the place where Olofssons lived. Suddenly, they see something in front of the car, like a couple of meters in front of it, and they thought that that's an airplane that flies really, really low. Like he described, it was flying to the level of the treetops. Eric stopped the car immediately and both of the guys went out just to see what it was flying there. And they both recalled that there was not a slight sound from this vehicle flying over them. We saw lights of different colors, evenly spaced, maybe 6 to 10 of them sitting on an oblong body. We were almost looking straight up at it. There was a glow about it and I could clearly see a closed hatch on the object. It was mostly still. I perceived it to be 200 or 300 meters from us. In the end, it disappeared behind the treetops. When both of the guys went home, they immediately reported this to the police, but no action was taken afterwards. What a surprise. But couple of kilometers away from both of these guys, there was another man. His name was Niklas Wilson, and he at this moment was going out from his stables, and then he suddenly notices something in the sky. He said that this object was Zeppelin shaped. He didn't see very much of it, just the outline of it, but what he remembers is that there were some lights and that object didn't make a sound. Niklas went back to his home to rush his family out so that everyone can see this weird object, but this object had already been gone. So the next day, Niklas meets Eric, who lives a couple of kilometers away. They were just like casually talking, and then one of them mentions that, I saw this weird thing in the sky, and the other says, yes, I also saw that thing in the sky. So, conclusion, Olofssons were not the only ones who saw that evening something in the sky, and the testimonies are kind of consistent and almost the same. Now, as I mentioned, this case was picked up by UFO Sweden, and they contacted the respective defense authorities to get some information whether on that night they saw something weird or unusual on their radars. And the reply was that there was nothing unusual there. However, there was some kind of Major Torsten Paulson who came forward stating that a fleet in Angelholm had reported that they had seen something weird in the sky that they couldn't explain. But there was no more detail about that. And when the UFO Sweden contacted the police department that received all of the reports from the civilians about those things that they saw in the sky that evening, they said that none of the documents or the reports had been maintained. They've been destroyed or lost or something. In other words, there was no documentation about these reports in their archives. And the policemen who were on duty on that night said that they don't recall anything from that night. I mean, yeah, that's a thing that you would most probably forget because it's so usual, so common, like people calling and reporting some weird flying objects in the sky. That's a thing you would most probably forget, right? The story of Olafsons, the couple that I was describing initially, was picked up by a newspaper called Norra Skåne, and they interviewed this couple and they told all of the story. And what happened was crazy. The newspaper started to receive tons of calls from different people, also from other areas, who were saying that they had encountered the same thing. So this means that not only the ones that I was telling you at the beginning saw this thing, there were even more people who saw something like that. So what could be the explanation? You know that I always like to find some kind of logic in these cases. So one of the logic explanations could be that it was actually a literal Zeppelin that was terrorizing people during that night in the area. And Major Knut Schunnesson, who was an expert in defense and security, claimed that he himself had seen some Zeppelins with light ramps in that area flying during that time. So can this be true? Now, a man named Per Lindstrand, who is a world-famous Swedish balloonist and airship designer, he confirmed that actually one of his airships, they were testing it in that area. So in that area in 1988, there were Zeppelins flying there. And he said that they had one that they were particularly flying in that area, and it was around 50 meters long and around 18 meters in diameter. Per Lindstrand said that they flew in 1 hour intervals with breaks for landings. Golf courses were often used because they were safe places to go down at night. The airship, which was called Panorama, was illuminated with a white light from inside and with white lights in the bow and stern. On the left side was a red lamp and on the right a green one. So seems kind of legit, but the pilot of this Panorama Zeppelin, his name was Lars Karlqvist, said that he never flew or very rarely flew these kind of Zeppelins during the winter time. And this thing, what the people reported, actually happened in November. So it was winter, so this could not have been Panorama. I can say with 95% certainty that we flew in the Gothenburg area then. Furthermore, I do not think that the description given by the witnesses is similar to Panorama, said Karlqvist. He also added that if that thing would have been Zeppelin, they would have seen it really clearly. It wouldn't be blurry or as it was described by those witnesses who had that kind of encounter on that night. And also Suzanne said that she had seen Zeppelins before and she wouldn't confuse that thing with Zeppelins for sure. Can this be some kind of a military experiment, or maybe these were some kind of spies flying over the Swedish territory? That can be an option because, like, in many cases when people have encounters, they explain it by, oh, that was just spies spying on us, you know. Well, I think that this would not be the case because this vehicle had a lot of lights. It drew a lot of attention to itself. And I mean, if you're spying, you usually try to be invisible. And in this case, remember, the light was so bright that it enlightened all of the golf club and also shone the light into the woods. I don't believe that this was some kind of spying or military action. So what we have at the end? We have a story that matches from different people, unrelated, from different areas, and there's literally a physical thing that everybody saw and nobody can really explain what it was. So this is a great mystery. And the question is, can this be extraterrestrial, considering that there are already a lot of reports about extraterrestrial things flying over us in a vehicle that resembles Zeppelin. A journalist and investigator from UFO Sweden, I have mentioned quite a lot him on my channel in regards to UFO cases, went back to Olofsson's many years after this encounter happened. Unfortunately, both of them have already been divorced and have their other families, but he still interviewed them, and he discovered that their stories are still the same, like to the slightest details. Nothing changes. They still stick to it up to nowadays as it was on the first day. And they said in those interviews that they remember this story quite often, just thinking what would have happened if they had decided to go out of the car to explore this vehicle closer. But then again, they don't regret that they prioritized their kids and just went away and thought about their safety. So here it is, one crazy story from Sweden. In my opinion, it could have been extraterrestrial. Now it's your turn. Let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Do you believe that this was something extraterrestrial, or there is maybe some other logic explanation to what they saw in the sky? That being said, I hope you have a lovely day. I hope you will press those likes, interact with my channel and videos, just so that it's pushed forward a little bit more in the algorithm system. I'm struggling a little bit with views again, but anyways, apart from that, I really enjoy what I'm doing here. I'm really enjoying reading all of your comments under my videos. I love you tons. You cannot even imagine how much your feedback means to me. It just makes me feel so important and special. See you next time.